Welcome back to Eagle Insight Podcast, where we help leaders everywhere master their craft and live better lives. Francesca Graham is a 2004 graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, so one of the premier leadership institutions in the world. And she served on active duty in the Army, largely as an intelligence officer, until her retirement in 2024. She's a combat veteran, and she's a SAMS grad, which is the Army's Jedi Knight School, where people learn to be strategic thinkers and to learn to be planners. And it is actually a kind of an elite school and difficult to get into. Mm-hmm. So kudos to you for that. In 2022, though, Francesca had a brush with toxic leadership. And when she called it out, she found herself on the wrong side of a protectionist leadership culture. So she has since been inspired to help others in the military find their voice. And she's currently serving as a chief operations officer at Walk the Talk Foundation. Francesca, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is awesome.
So you're minding your own business, being a very successful SAMS grad and doing wonderful things in the military intelligence world. And then you run into a really toxic culture. Mm-hmm. Yep. What happened there?
Again, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And I'd like to just preface slightly for all the Poindexters in the group, or the naysayers. So I had been I enlisted in 1997 as a little E1, and went to West Point in 2000, graduated in 2004, and so I want to make sure that all of the listeners understand that this event that started actually in July of 2021 was not the first time that I had ever experienced toxic leadership. I mean, right. But it was the first time that I made a complaint about toxic leadership. And it also wasn't the first time I had experienced sexual harassment, but it was the first time I had reported sexual harassment. And the reason why is because, I've said this before when I chat with people, is I was so woefully unprepared for a leader or a person. He wasn't a leader. He's a terrible guy. A person who, we always say people are leaders when they're in leadership positions, but they're not. They're just people. A person who was so capable at manipulation and this like narcissistic, psychopathic manipulation that was just it. So as a overarching example of the culture that I walked into when I was in the Joint Staff J25 was I had not been there for more than 2 hours, and my boss, the senior civilian who's ultimately who I made the complaint against, he pulled me in his office and he's pacing back and forth, and he was a retired, I think, Marine Corps 05 lieutenant colonel, and he was equivalent to an SCS-1, so 1-star, equivalent to a 1-star general. And pulls me into his office, and he's like, hi, who are you? Blah, 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 here I am. And he then says, you know what, Colonel Graham, I've done my research on you. And I was like, what? And he says, I've heard that you lack empathy, that you are a very black and white person, and you completely lack empathy. Which, for anybody that knows me, is somewhat false on a lot of levels. My empathy is so strong, it's kind of pathetic. I don't want to say my empathy, but my heart is so strong, it's kind of pathetic. And then he just went into this rage, because I asked him, I was like, well, sir, what do you expect of me? What are your expectations of me as one of your branch chief in your directorate? And he got up and he was pacing the floor, and he is just, I had not been there 2 hours. You have the branch of no, you have your deputy branch chief is a piece of, and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, okay. So I said to him, I was like, okay, sir, I'll make an assessment of the organization. And he just, the deputy branch chief, and I'm just using this as one somewhat minor example. He's like, he was adamant. And then the 06 pulled me into his office, the vice J25 director pulls me into his office right after, and he says, you heard this guy, he better not see this deputy branch chief's name on the roster ever again. So I removed her from her position. And I said, you're no longer the deputy branch chief. I find out about a year later. I find out about a year later. There's so much paranoia. Everyone's talking about each other all the time. It was just chaos all the time. Not to mention Afghanistan withdrawal, Nigeria situation, Sudan, Ethiopia, Russia, Ukraine, just everything, right? And I find out about a year later as I'm starting to, like, I just can't take this environment anymore because it's so abusive. It's the gaslighting, you're paranoid, sexual harassment, sharing medical information, all sorts of stuff. I found out about a year later that immediately after I removed this person from her position, he went to her and said, I can't believe Colonel Graham did that. I can't believe Colonel Graham removed you. Don't worry, I'll take care of you. We all know what Colonel Graham is. She lacks sympathy. We all know her. She spent a bunch of time at Fort Bragg. She's just coming in here like a typical military person and just shaking everything up and firing people left and right. So that's the environment that I was in, and that was constant.
So that's like so abnormal to the military culture that we were taught as cadets, right? We were taught that the people who join the military are patriots, and that they're good people, and that we're taught to take care of each other and to look after the troops that are under our command. That's repeated at every level in the institution, that this is who we are. This is our culture. But there's pockets of this toxicity that exist all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a like a textbook example of a culture that's just going to eat itself alive. But for some reason, it seems to persist.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you suppose that is?
Because the organization is designed, there are mechanisms in place, and that's what our Walk the Talk Foundation writes legislation about, helps people work through. There are mechanisms in place called the administrative punishment system and the administrative investigatory system that allow corrupt people or allow unscrupulous people to pick the sides of who they are going to support and who they're not going to support and who they're going to protect. And if someone raises their head, or little gopher peering up like, hey, I've been told all this time, if you see something, say something, never walk past a piece of trash, always take care of your people, all this other stuff, and you naively stick your head up and you say something, all of a sudden this organization is now turned against you, with the JAG, with the public affairs office team, with the IG team, with the EO team, whoever it is. And you as a complainant are now isolated. You're entirely isolated. You don't have, as a complainant, you don't have a lawyer that's set up to help you. You don't have counsel. You don't have an advocate. You don't have any of these things. And I think the deeper cultural issue that I think what you are referring to is there's a nepotistic desire to protect the people that you picked. So this SES, or Dysel really, he was selected above everyone else to be in this senior leadership position, a director at chief in the Joint Staff J2. And if he is found guilty of having committed some sort of infraction, whatever it is, then by right, the people who picked him to be in that position, the people who let him go past all these leadership wickets and all these boards and selection, they should also have some sort of guilt attached to their name of, why did we pick this person? But that's not what we see. We see over and over again this officer, I call it senior officer, and NCO as well, but I look at the officers primarily because I'm an officer. I take it a little personal. We see the senior leader officer protectionism that is almost, it's almost impossible to get past.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point that if I select somebody for a position and then they turn out to be an abusive or toxic leader, that reflects poorly on me as the person that selected them for the job. Now, if I'm following Army leadership doctrine, if I'm following what we say, what we espouse as our values,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be the first person to go, ooh, I was wrong about John. He turned out to not be who I thought he was, and he's toxic, and we've got to get rid of John. And as a leader, if I stand up and own that, I'm taking a risk because I was the one who selected him. But I think I'm living congruent with my values and the Army values.
But that's not what we reward, though. We don't reward a. So let's say I think let's say someone's a brigade commander. That brigade commander has 17 complaints, IG complaints that come out of their brigade, whatever they are, IG complaints or fraud, waste, and abuse, sexual harassment, whatever, right? Or EO complaints. That brigade commander or any commander, anybody in any leadership position is not rewarded, is not incentivized through their evaluations, through their network of people for how well they handled those 18 IG complaints. They are incentivized that they had 0 IG complaints that came out of their brigade because their leadership culture was so freaking awesome that no one complained about anything. And so the incentive then, therefore, is to sweep everything under the rug and silence the people who have an issue and silence the people who want to say, hey, this person's toxic. Like for my case, I reported sexual harassment in October 2022. I reported it to my 2-star general, to my brigade commander, to my battalion commander, to my J2 chief of staff, to my first line supervisor, to my vice. So a whole bunch of 06s and above, I reported sexual harassment to. And also the equal opportunity officer for the military, for that unit. It was not until, so that was October 22. It was not until December 2023 that any sort of formal paperwork was filed per Army regulations concerning that alleged sexual harassment that I made. And the only reason it was filed because I found out through Google searches that there is a document that the Army now must use post Vanessa Guillen to file and to track sexual harassment allegations. But they didn't file it. They all knew about it. They all knew.
So, I mean, you're talking about a larger institutional problem rather than just an isolated,
100%.
right? And it's easier for us to deal with that, to think about that from a cultural perspective, of say, yeah, there are some bad apples. Some, if a fly got in the kitchen, there's a hole in the screen, and there are colonels and generals that make it through the system in spite of their toxicity. But what you're saying is, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, is that it's the institution itself that says, hold on, I'm going to judge a command based on what appears to be good order and discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything that's detracting from good order and discipline, they have now a powerful incentive to make sure that never gets upstairs.
Correct.
And I remember being a second lieutenant and seeing a soldier get a DUI and a company commander relieved.
Yep.
because a soldier got a DUI because clearly you just didn't take care of that soldier enough, and they decided to drink and drive, which I thought was absolutely bananas.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what control does that company commander have over soldiers in their off time that would prevent that? But what it turned out to be is, like, people then started to go, well, you don't want a DUI, you want some other lesser charge of, driving recklessly or whatever,
Yep.
because that won't get me relieved.
Yep. That a commander that is actually transparent about what is going on inside of their organization, commander, leader, whoever, who's 100% transparent, will probably get relieved.
Yeah,
In the way that our system is designed right now, they will probably get relieved. And so there's this and so there's that aspect of it. What do we actually incentivize? What do we reward? because we reward a total lack of mistakes, or not even mistakes. That's not fair to say. We reward our evaluation system, rewards a total lack of people in your organization being dumbasses. and that's just impossible. Like, we intentionally recruit people who have the proclivity to be dumbasses. And that's a great thing. I remember when in 2012 in sequestration, when the 82nd Airborne Division came out with this preposterous policy that any soldier in the 82nd that got any Article 15 for anything was going to get out-processed for separation. And I was like, good Lord, you'll lose the whole division if you do that. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, we've got a history of dipping into zero tolerance mentality in the military. And every time we've done that, we've created risk-averse leaders who then will not do the things that it takes to really get things done.
Yep.
They won't take risks. They will color inside the lines every chance they get. And whenever the crayon goes outside the line, they're going to make sure that nobody sees it.
Yep. Yep.
And in its moments like this without a history, it usually has to do with budgets, right? There's going to be a downsizing of the force. It happened in the 80s. It happened in the 90s. And obviously in the 2000s, several different times. And it has this other effect of okay, if I'm risk averse, I can't let any blemish show, then I have that there's two things at play. I think I have a tendency to become more toxic because I'm going to be more controlling. And second, I'm going to cover things up because I can't let people upstairs see the dumbassery down at the motor pool.
Yeah.
Because then my career is at risk.
Yep.
And that fear makes me anxious and it makes me mean. Because now I've gone to lizard brain, right? I'm in fight or flight. And so every little thing that could detract from my greatness as a leader is now something that's got to be stamped out with enthusiasm.
And it's very easy. I think one of the show points that I mentioned to you was this Stockholm syndrome that I think is very prevalent inside of the military. It's very easy for senior officers to blame the juniors for all the problems that are inside the military, because the juniors, because of Stockholm syndrome and a bit of the abusive culture that we all endure, officers, enlisted, whoever, they'll make excuses for the seniors blaming the juniors. So I was part of the one of my last things I did down at Fortress Bragg, now Fort Liberty, before I moved to DC for this last assignment before I retired, was General Kurilla asked me to be, or directed me, he doesn't ask, he directed me to be on his team that went down to now Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood, to take part of the investigation of 1st Cav Division, which he was the IO for, appointed by General Garrett, whatnot. And one of the things that I was getting frustrated with, and quite a few other, mostly women NCOs and officers on our team were getting frustrated with, was that there was this trend amongst the team, the longer we were down there doing this investigation, to say, well, the E6s and below, that's the problem. This is for sexual harassment, sexual assault stuff. E6s and below, that's the problem. Statistically, that's where the problem sits, right? And statistically, you can say, yes, E6s and below are the problem because that's where the majority of the people in the force are. So, what do they say? Statistics lie and are dirty liars.
Well, there's more to it than just the population size. It's also, those are the people that don't have protectionists to bury the reports up higher.
Correct. Correct. So actually on our way back, we had a military chartered plane back, and, we're all in the, I can't forget, the fuselage area. And we're all sitting there like cold and miserable because the heat wasn't working. And it was cold and miserable. And I was
the Air Force does that to us on purpose, right?
No. And I was just frustrated with this officer protectionism that I saw going on. Like, this is preposterous. And so I wrote down a list, a piece of paper, and I handed it to General Kurilla. And what I had done was I said, okay, from O1 to actually from E1 to the rank that I was at the time, O4, what were the ranks on each rank? What were the ranks of people that had sexually harassed me, or in 2011 when I was sexually assaulted? What were the ranks of these people? Every single one of them was E8 and above. Every single one of them. And I'm just looking. I was like, sir, it's not the E6s and below are not the problems. Ratio wise, there's more of them, and a problem exists. So of course the numbers are going to show that. But the problem are, to your point, the seniors who are doing it themselves and therefore protect or stifle or sweep under the rug the crap that's happening in their formation.
So I think there's no doubt that there is widespread, let's call it corruption, because that's what it is. Um, my question is really, how widespread is that? I've served with a lot of different officers. I spent 30 years in uniform. I know a lot of people, and I do know some bad actors, and I work for some toxic leaders. But by and large, most of my leaders were good people
Mm-hmm.
who led well and would be aghast if they were accused of not holding somebody accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So, how big a problem is it, Francesca?
So I'll answer two ways. First way is that, you said you had good leaders who were good people. I had good leaders that were good people as well. But it's possible for two things to be right at the same time.
Sure.
Uh, Ryan Swayze, our president founder, he wrote an article about that these good leaders who are good people also could be very capable of covering up when an interest, when something comes up that conflicts with their own interest. So that's the first point. The second point is how widespread is it? I'm not going to suppose. But what I do know, I can't give you a number because statistics lie. And furthermore, the DoD doesn't release the numbers on these things, even though we ask for them. So I can't give you a number. Congress asked for them too, and they can't give you a number either because DoD will redact, full page black redact the pages that Congress actually needs to answer the exact question you're giving. But what I can say, though, is if I were to use myself plus the 400 or so different, just over 400, I think, different people that our foundation has advised over the last 4 years, or excuse me, 3 years that the foundation has been in existence, the problem is widespread enough that there is a trust deficit that has been identified within the Department of Defense, specific to the military, that is impacting our recruiting numbers, is impacting our retention numbers, is impacting the people who are part of the family business that is the United States military, and family members are not recommending the military to their family, to their children, because of an abusive leadership culture, a toxic leadership culture, and is impacting our suicide numbers, is impacting. I mean, you just look at all of the metrics that you can use as essentially your circumstantial evidence. It is widespread enough that we're hurting as an organization. When I went to in December 2023, I had the opportunity to speak with office call with Lieutenant General Laura Potter, who was the Army G2 at the time, and she was gracious enough to give me an office call. I went in and I said, "Hey, ma'am, I'm not here to talk about Lieutenant Colonel Francesca Graham and the nonsense I'm going through. I'm here to use my case as an example of if this is happening, if this reprisal, this retaliation, all of the mental health issues I was struggling with at the time, the physiological issues I was struggling, if this is happening to me, a West Point grad, been in the Army since 1997, senior jump master, 3 master's degrees, all this, falderall of credentials. If this is happening to me, I was like, our E5 to E1 population, they're really, really in a bad place. Our O2, O1 population, they're in a really bad place because they're really freaking vulnerable. And her response, now this is the Army G2, a woman who has this great reputation for being all about, gender equality and, get rid of sexual harassment, get rid of sexual assault, all this stuff. great reputation for all that. EO policy. She says to me, if you had spoken to the right people, maybe you would have gotten the help you needed. Now I ask you, I tried to speak to my 2-star. He refused to give me an office call. He sent me to his JAG. He refused twice to give me an office call. I spoke to my brigade commander. I spoke to my battalion commander. I spoke to the military opportunity officer. I spoke to the SARC. I spoke to everyone. And that was still her response. And she knew that because I told her. But if you had spoken to the right people, maybe you would have gotten the help you needed. Officer protectionism from the top.
Yeah. So if it's happening from the top, it's probably pretty pervasive throughout the ranks. So what is a junior officer, for example, supposed to do about that? To frame that, I had a conversation with the guy that wrote the report on toxic leadership in the military in must have been 2002.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a problem. This is not a new problem.
No.
Right?
Nope.
This goes back a long ways. But I talked to the author of that report and specifically asked him about, like, okay, you're working for a toxic leader. What are you supposed to do? And he had a very interesting answer because I was expecting, like, okay, here's the channels you get to report. He said, there's a big problem with this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because if you want to go after a toxic leader that you're working for, you really only have one shot at it. You can take a swing at them. You can report them through various channels or multiple channels.
Yep.
But if you swing and miss, you're done.
And there's a high chance you will swing and miss.
That is very true. And then the second thing is you can swing and hit, but not hit hard enough.
Yep.
And now you're still in a very vulnerable position. And the third thing is that you could swing and hit and get that person fired. And you are still now in a very vulnerable position because that leader's peers and seniors are going to look at you as a troublemaker.
Yep.
I don't want somebody in my command who's going to be looking over my shoulder and checking me every day to see if I, as the leader, am doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because I'm too busy for that. I don't want to have to deal with Francesca out there who might be looking at me strange and saying, okay, I think Bob's a toxic leader. Let me go turn him in.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a natural response to having a whistleblower in your organization.
I don't want to give an excuse and say it's a natural response. I don't agree with that. It's only a natural response if your perception of whistleblowers is that they are troublemakers. It's not a natural response if your perception of whistleblowers is exactly what our propaganda says whistleblowers are, which is people who refuse to walk past a piece of trash, people who want to make an organization better, the rebels, or what did General Dunford call them? I forget the word, but general, we need agitators. We need the people who are going to tell us what we need to do better. We need to. But how do we actually treat them? So one of the things that, another data point, and from the DoD itself, which is kind of fun, is that the or DoD or Government Accountability Office, the most recent data that we have for the number of substantiated whistleblower reprisal complaints within the Department of Defense across all the services. Do you want to know what the percentage is?
How big?
2.41%.
Huh.
That means, if you do your math, that about 98% of people who said they're being reprised against are freaking liars. And that's only accounting for the people that the IG even deigned to investigate their allegation, their complaint. I mean, it's absolutely possible. So to your point, like what does a junior leader do? What does a junior officer, NCO, or just E1 shoot? This is where you get very nebulous, right? I think that you have to, if you are in the military, you have to have a very good sense of what you believe is right or wrong and what decisions you have to make to be able to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and to be able to say to yourself, I am doing the right thing. Because again, this SES and this environment that I was in, it wasn't the first time I had met toxic leaders. It wasn't. But it was the first time that it had such an overwhelming impact on me and on others around me that I said to myself, I have to do something. Like that was one of my mentors, he wrote in October 23, he didn't know all this stuff was going on, but he wrote me this email, and he was giving me some advice, or talking about a book. And he said at the end of his email, it was just great. He's a retired 1-star. It was such an awesome way to sign off this email. And he said something along the lines of like, also Francesca, you always have to have some sort of something like an acceptable alternative to the environment. And he's like, and on a personal level, I'm paraphrasing slightly. He said, and on a personal level, you always need to have enough money saved up so that at a certain point, if you really need to, you can just say, fuck it, I'm out.
Yeah.
And that's where I was.
So I coach leaders that look, anytime that you're in a situation that's adverse, you have three choices, right? You can try to fix it, you can learn to live with it, or you can leave it. Those are the only three choices I can come up with. And if you can come up with a fourth one, I'm happy to add that to the roster. But it seems like those are the only three things that you can do. A whistleblower is going to try to fix it, but it's going to face a very, very tough road, particularly when an overwhelming institutional culture doesn't like to be disrupted.
Correct.
Now, I'll go back to the fact that as a battalion commander, if somebody's making complaints against me, I don't think I would personally have reprisals against them. I don't think that's my character. I don't think that that's what it. I think I would take it seriously. Of what have I done to give them the impression that I've done something wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, I didn't face any investigations as a battalion commander. I did have some minor IG complaints as an 06 commander, which the IG called me up and laughed at because they're very minute. But that's not the experience that some of my peers had.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them had complaints that were, in fact, reprisals to them holding people accountable.
Yeah.
And then people used the legitimate systems, whether it was EO or sexual harassment systems, to say that this leader is not doing the right thing. And so they weaponized the very systems that you're saying
Mm-hmm. that
people should be able to rely on.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate because that creates a skepticism in those systems. Right. I can tell you that as my friend was going through this, I'm looking at going, wow, should we be suspicious of every single complaint that goes up? Maybe they're all unfounded. Now that's a natural, again, I'm saying that's a natural thing for a leader to think. And we have to be deliberate about overcoming our natural instincts.
Yep.
But it's a shame that there are people that do abuse the systems, which then detract from the actual use of them.
Yeah, I agree. And I, within our foundation, between myself and Ryan, I am one of those. I am, of the two of us, I have the awesome experience of having lived through both sides of the system, where I made a complaint, and part of the reprisal against me was to initiate 2 counter investigations against me a month and a half after I made the complaint, based on entirely fraudulent claims that were unsubstantiated. But I'm very intimately aware of the fact that the system can be weaponized against a person, either as reprisal, or can be weaponized against a person because a commander just wants some sort of guilty or substantiation of some sort of allegation, just so they can use that as a reason to fire someone, when that commander is well within their right to fire someone for anything, but they want to have this IG, which Army Regulation 20-1, it specifically says in there, IGs are the eyes and ears of the commander. There is literally nothing about them that is independent. Nothing. So like you said, well, your IG called you and laughed, and they were minute allegations. Here's the bleeding heart defense attorney on the other side of the line here. I guarantee you they weren't minute allegations from the perspective of whoever made them.
Well, I
Do you know
think.
what I mean?
Oh no, I don't disagree with that. In that particular case, it was somebody who said that I was leading in a way that was only concerned with my legacy as a commander. That's not an IG complaint.
No, it's not.
But they called the IG and said that I was worried about my legacy. And what I did in response to that was not to go find out who did it, but to make it clear to people that my legacy was not as important as the future of this particular organization. It seemed to have smoothed out, but it was interesting that somebody thought that they had to do that, or they felt obligated to do that, to try to protect the status quo.
Well, one of the things that our foundation helps people with, and we actually did on our podcast, the Star Chamber podcast, we have an episode coming out shortly, in the next couple of weeks, several weeks. Basically, it's what's your job anyways? What does an IG do? Because a lot of people don't know that what the IG's responsibilities are: fraud, waste, and abuse, abuse of authority, retaliation, restriction. So those are the things that IGs are there for. A person, whoever, goes to the IG and says, "Well, I have this complaint," and the IG looks at it as like, "Well, I don't even do that." Now, here's a question though. So that person, I'm putting you on the spot here. That person who made that complaint saying you're only concerned with your legacy, do you think that, or did the IG help that person understand that, okay, if this is truly a complaint for you, if this is truly something that's bothering you as a subordinate of Brigade Commander Dixon, this is who you need to actually go talk to? Guarantee you
Yeah.
that didn't happen.
Yeah, I do not know what the conversation was like, but what I
Mm-hmm.
do know is that I acknowledged that there was a perception problem that I had. And in that
Yeah.
case, I believe that the IG was helping the command. And I think he was helping me as the
Mm-hmm.
commander, but more importantly, helping the organization because I had a cultural and communications issue.
It's fair.
Thank you for pointing that out to me, and let me own that, and
Mm-hmm.
and make sure I reiterate, look, this isn't about me. This is about the organization. I think that was a great professional use of their time to give me that call when they didn't need to, because it was not a complaint. I had not broken a rule or regulation, at least not at that time. Now there's another challenge: is there are so many rules and regulations that it's very easy for people to break them and not know it. And so there's this fear again, as you take command, you get to spend in the pre-command courses, you get to spend time with the Army IG who will tell you, okay, these are the top 10 things that are going to get you in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also 1,000 other regulations that you don't know about that might also get you in trouble.
Yep.
And so there's this self-preservation gene that kicks off in your brain when people start making complaints about you. It's like, oh my gosh, did I break a law? Did I break a rule or regulation that is or a policy that I just wasn't aware of?
Mm-hmm. I wish I could feel sympathy for the commanders, but I don't. I really don't. And the reason why, and I was a commander, and I don't feel sympathy for myself, right? The reason why I don't in that situation, the scenario that you're describing, is if that is a legitimate concern of that person, that they do not know all the laws and what are they going to get caught with, they probably, then they're not really focused on what their duty is to their command. And not only that, but okay, so you have a commander who says, well, I don't know all the laws, I don't even know if I'm breaking laws or regulations, whatever it is, right? But that commander has a JAG, has the IG, which by regulation is the eyes and ears of the commander, has the EO, which is subordinate to the IG in our system, or is a element of the IG in our system, has senior level mentors, and that's just that has a first sergeant or sergeant major, whatever, or first shirt Air Force, has the entire institution of the Department of Defense behind them to help them. For you, say, as brigade commander, you had probably 2,000 or so people in your unit. You are the only person, and those 6 or so battalion commanders, you are the only, say, 8 to 9 people out of 2,000 ish who have this organization that exists solely to protect you.
So I had a little bit of a different experience because I was a engineer district commander in the Corps of Engineers. So
Oh, that's funky.
I
That's funky. Yeah,
had
they're funky.
I had a whole law firm. I had 15 lawyers that worked for me because
Right.
I got sued frequently. That that's part of the gig, and so I agree with you that look, I have to accept the responsibility for what's going on, and if I'm worried about breaking every little law, I should be checking with my lawyers on every little thing. That's going to stifle anything that you're going to try to accomplish. But that is also a criticism of the whistleblower.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you make a complaint, even if it's not against me, say it's against one of my leaders subordinate to me, I've got
Yep.
to open up an investigation. By law, I have to open up an investigation depending on how they reported it.
Correct.
I now have to put a bunch of institutional energy into that. And I have been in many a room when I wasn't the commander making a decision where somebody would come in and say, we now have a EO complaint, an IG complaint, or a SARC, whatever it's called today.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I've been out for 5 years. That they have a complaint.
Mm-hmm.
And I have yet to been in a room where the entire group of people went, oh no. Every single time it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
no. And I fortunately never saw anybody go, well, how do we cover this up and make it go away?
Yeah.
Never saw that. What I saw was, okay, who's going to be the investigating officer? Let's make sure there's somebody we can rely on to get it done right.
And quickly.
If at all possible, let's get it done quickly for sure. And if there's something there, then there needs to be something dealt with. And I worked for some very, very good leaders that did see a bunch of them through and saw people go away, saw offenders go away, and I did not see retribution to whistleblowers in those cases that I personally observed.
Mm-hmm.
But I also recognized that I may have had a very charmed career where I was only in good units with the exception of twice where I worked for toxic leaders. And those leaders actually, their careers ended after their toxic leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So I do consider that I might be blessed, but I also consider that there may be people who've had so many bad experiences that their view of the institution is very different from mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are some protected populations that experience a lot worse than I did.
Experiences may differ, of course,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I mean, so another article that Ryan and I published recently was, I think it was some, so your daughter wants to join the military, our thoughts.
Yeah.
And, you know, I am very conflicted with recommending to people, especially women, don't join the military because the chances of sexual harassment are high, the chances of sexual assault are high, the chances of gender discrimination are high. I'm very conflicted with recommending to women that they don't join the military because it's very easy for us to see ourselves in a situation where we become the self-fulfilling prophecy of so many that women just can't handle it. That's why they're not here. And I don't want that to happen, because although my experience, my last couple of years were particularly difficult, and I experienced discrimination, all their nonsense, throughout the course of my career, I love the Army more than, I mean, the reason I'm doing the nonsense that I'm doing right now, that I don't even get paid for the most part, by the way, I really don't. I'm living primarily off my pension, is because of how much I love the Army. So one of my brothers, he's a 06 in the infantry. He's a freaking rock star. He hasn't had the same experiences I have, but he knows that my experiences are real, and I know that he hasn't had the same, but I don't equate that to the fact of him being a man and my being a woman. It just is. It just so happens. The luck of the draw is the luck of the draw. Uh, but man, I love the Army. It's so much freaking fun. There are so many cool things that I've done in the Army. I mean, nap of the earth nonsense in Korea in the back of a helicopter, getting tossed around like crazy, hanging
And
out with jets. I mean, it's so freaking
oh, by
cool.
the way, in case the audience doesn't know that you're a jump master that
Oh,
has
yeah.
fallen out of an aircraft more times than most people
Oh,
can
yeah.
even dream of.
So
Uh,
much fun.
it's not that you have an axe to grind because you don't like the institution. It's
Mm-mm.
because you love it enough to call it out when it's not being what it says it is.
Right.
And I think that that applies to institutions and it applies to leaders. And my best friends will tell me when I'm not being who I say I am.
Mhm.
They're going to tell me, hey, you always say do this, and then I see you doing that. They will call me on it. Only good friends will do that.
Yeah, I actually had, if I could share a quick story, when I was at Sam's, we had a dinner that we went to, and the speaker at the dinner was a '06. And during his speech, he said a lot of very, very inappropriate things to the point where other people on my table were commenting on the inappropriate things he was saying. And I struggled with it a little bit, and I thought about it over the weekend because it happened on Friday. And I said, you know what, this is crap. He shouldn't be saying those things. And also, he was validating for some of my fellow officers that were at Sam's some of the horrible things that they had been, these my fellow officers had been saying about their wives. As an example, like when we were on a bus trip down to Vicksburg for a staff ride, and these two of my classmates, fellow fours, are talking and blah blah blah, and they just start trashing on their wives, trashing on them.
Mm.
And I finally said to him at one point, one of them called his wife a bitch, and I finally said to him, I was like, what on earth, are you serious? I was like, who asked who to marry who in this situation? Who's the bitch? Right. And they were just, wow, this is male bonding, blah blah blah. And then you have this '06 up there saying just this terrible thing. So anyways, so I got in on Monday and I said, hey, I sent an email. I was like, sir, I'd like to have a conversation with you with the '06. I'm not making a complaint. I want to have a conversation with you. So all these '06s now come and tell me, like, you shouldn't go talk to him. That's I'm like, I don't care. I'm gonna go talk to him. So I did. So he gave me an office call. I went in there, and he's making all these excuses. Well, Major Graham, at the time, you don't understand. It meant the tenor and the tone of the dinner and blah blah blah. And and I realized finally nothing I was saying was getting into his head. And I looked at his bio before, and he's a West Point grad. He's a former brigade commander. He's an '06, right? So I said to him after I realized that nothing I was saying was going into his head. So I said to him finally, I said, you know what, sir? I was like, I looked at your bio before I came in here. And I was like, and there's three things that stand out to me. First and foremost, you're an '06. Second of all, you were former brigade commander. Third of all, you're a fellow West Point graduate. And I said, and as a fellow West Point graduate, I know you know better. I know you know what you said was wrong, and you're making excuses. He actually started crying. He
Mm.
did. He said I was the first person in 20 something years who had called him on his BS. And he did. He actually started
So
tearing up.
one of the things that I advocate for leaders is that everybody needs a sergeant major because as a commander, your sergeant major's on your hip, and that is the person that's going to tell you when you're screwed up.
Mm,
And too many leaders in and out of uniform don't have somebody like that in their lives who's going to hold up a mirror and say, "Hey, Bob, that
knock
thing
it
you
off.
just did isn't consistent with who you say you are."
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us need somebody in our lives like that. And I think the institution of the DoD and the Army in particular needs to have somebody, some people, some institutions of their own to hold up a mirror and let them know when they're not being who they say they are. And Francesca, thank you for doing that for an institution that both of us love. We may see a few things differently, but I agree with you that if we're not living up to our values, we should be called on it. Thank you again for being here. I love your passion for our institution that we both love. And what you're doing is going to make a difference. So keep at it. And if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know.
No, I really appreciate it. And be sure to check out our foundation, Walk the Talk Foundation, and our podcast, The Star Chamber.
I'm
And thank you.
subscribed, and so should you guys out there. And we will be checking back in with you very soon. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bob.